Hi there. My name is Vienna Morrill, and today I'll be presenting to you my IRB proposal on vitamin D status and VO2 max in recreational runners living in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Massachusetts. To start, here's a quick overview of our agenda for today. I'm going to start by giving a quick introduction to vitamin D, talk about what vitamin D status looks like specifically in athlete populations and how it applies to athletic performance. And we'll talk about my research question and why this is relevant. And then I'll walk you through the methodology and data analysis, and we'll wrap it up with some discussion around what this all means and why I believe that this is a very exciting and important research topic to pursue. So, to begin, a quick introduction of vitamin D. Vitamin D is metabolized both in the skin through sunshine, and then also in the intestinal tract through dietary vitamin D intake. Vitamin D is really important for calcium and phosphorus homeostasis in the body. It acts as a precursor steroid to many important metabolic and biological processes in the body, and actually vitamin D receptors have been found in nearly every single organ in the body. Deficiency and toxicity. Deficiency is actually quite prevalent. Estimates of up to 88% of the global population are deficient. Deficiency has long been associated with rickets in children and adolescents, also osteomalacia in adults, really just because it has such an important role in bone mineralization. Other disease states associated with vitamin D include cardiovascular disease, tuberculosis, depression, cognitive decline, autoimmune diseases, and then finally, toxicity is actually pretty rare, and there is some debate around what constitutes toxicity. However, if you do run into vitamin D toxicity, the real concern is the calcification of those of your tissues and organs, which can lead to a whole host of issues. So sources of vitamin D include UVB radiation. Vitamin D is known as the sunshine vitamin. Also, fatty fish is an excellent source of vitamin D. And then other sources which maybe not quite as, don't have quite as much but do still contribute include, eggs, beef, liver, cheese, a lot of animal products, as well as shiitake mushrooms and other irradiated mushrooms. And then, of course, fortified foods. And the reality is that for a lot of people, they need to rely on supplements to get their vitamin D intake met. So vitamin D, how much is enough? And as I mentioned, this is an area of some debate. The RDA levels are based on recommendations from the Institute of Medicine, which says you're deficient if you have less than 20 nanograms per milliliter, and really sets the ceiling at 50 nanograms per milliliter. Their recommended daily intake is 600 international units per day. Then you have the Endocrine Society, which is really saying that 20 nanograms per milliliter, they agree that maybe that's a good threshold for deficiency, but really ideally recommending that you get at least 30 nanograms per milliliter, and recommending that in order to do that, you have a supplement that's more like 1,500 to 2,000 international units per day. So as you can see, this is an area of debate, and personally I would not be surprised if we saw vitamin D recommendations change in the decade ahead. So as we start to think about vitamin D and athletic performance specifically, it really seems that vitamin D in athletic performance, the topic has come up a lot more recently. There's a lot more research about it recently, but interestingly enough, going back in history to ancient Rome, the athletic trainers for the Olympians would actually recommend that their athletes undergo what they called heliotherapy, which was basically sunbathing as part of their training routines. They also encouraged diets that were very rich in the very things that contain vitamin D, including fatty fish. So those Romans knew what they were talking about. Flash forward about 1,200 years to the 21st century, and we see a lot of emerging research that associates vitamin D with improved strength, increased cardiovascular fitness, reduced inflammation, and improved immunity. Reduced inflammation, really important because it means less injury, less time lost to training. Same with immunity, improved immunity, less time lost due to illness. Early on in my research, I became really interested in the link between vitamin D and improved cardiovascular fitness. And one of the first studies that I came across was a study of elite rowers who were given a 6,000 international unit per day supplement over an 8-week period during a training cycle. And there was a placebo group, control group, and then there was the test group, intervention group. And what they found was in the test group, they had a 3.5 percentage point greater improvement in VO2 max, as well as a 400% increase in their vitamin D levels, which is quite significant. And anyone who's an athlete and understands VO2 max knows that 3.5 percentage points is nothing to scoff at. Another study I came across was specifically about vitamin D and how there were improved measures of the heart associated with vitamin D. Specifically, that vitamin D deficient athletes, severely vitamin D deficient athletes, presented significantly smaller heart structures, which leads me to wonder if that was maybe part of the problem that the Grinch encountered before apparently getting his vitamin D levels back up to snuff. So what is VO2 max? Just want to quickly touch on this and make sure we're all on the same page. VO2 max is really known as the gold standard of cardiovascular fitness in the athletic community. And really what it measures is the maximum milliliters of oxygen an athlete can consume per minute, and that is adjusted for body weight in kilograms. Obviously, the more oxygen that you can get to the muscles in your body, the faster and longer longer you can go. It's estimated that 40 to 60% of athletes have vitamin D deficiency. Athletes are subject to many of the same factors that impact your vitamin D levels as the general population. So things like where you live and your skin pigmentation and your dietary patterns. However, the type of athlete you are may have a further impact that if you're training outside a lot, especially in southern latitudes, you have more exposure to the sun. But if you're training in a gym all the time, like a gymnast, then you may be more susceptible. Also, recreational runners living in New England, they're living north of the 40th parallel, which is the demarcation for where seasonal vitamin D issues become prevalent. And then also, even during the summer months, they're often training before work, after work. They're usually not outside during those hours when the UVB radiation is sufficient to synthesize vitamin D in your skin. My research hypothesis: recovery from vitamin D levels less than 20 nanograms per milliliter to levels of 32 nanograms per milliliter, which I'm calling the athletic zone, results in an increased VO2 max among runners in New England. This is an overview of the methodology. We have one group of runners, we have one intervention, 2 research variables, and 2 data collection points. So talk about the group of runners. Going to start by recruiting hopefully 200 runners, and then we're going to test them for deficiency. We are hoping that at least 25% or so present deficiency under 20 nanograms per milliliter. And then we're also building in some additional buffer for, just attrition. Some people may not make it through the full study. So our end sample size is 45. That's calculated using G-power, a p-value of 0.05, and a medium effect size, power of 95%. We're going to include both male and female runners, really looking at healthy adults. I've detailed a lot of exclusion criteria in the actual IRB proposal document, but really making sure that the people who come are healthy and are not going to be at risk of having a cardiac event during the VO2 max testing, for instance. Also BMI, we know that obesity is associated with making it a little bit more difficult to get your vitamin D levels up, just because vitamin D is stored in the fat tissue. So we're trying to find people with a healthy BMI as well. People who run probably about 15 to 40 miles per week and have done so consistently over the past year. We're going to do this over 8 weeks, beginning in mid-March, concluding mid-May. Feel like by mid-March, people will be nice and vitamin D deficient, since they won't have had good sun exposure for the past 6 months or so. And then we're going to give them a 6,000 international unit a day supplement. So drawing from that study of the elite rowers, similar structure. And then at the start, we're going to check their vitamin D levels and their VO2 max. We'll record that information, and then we'll record it again at the conclusion in mid-May. We're going to recruit runners, going to reach out to a lot of the running associations in the area, use social media, newsletters, get the word out about the study. I think that this is a study that will sincerely interest quite a few runners. Getting your VO2 max testing is an attractive prospect in itself. And then we're also going to partner with some other institutions who have exercise physiology programs and nutrition programs. And this will enable us to set up test sites across New England and make sure that those test sites are staffed with qualified personnel. The methodology, what we're going to do with our analysis is we're really going to look, is there a statistically significant relationship between increased vitamin D status and increased VO2 max? We're going to run 2 types of statistical tests. One is a t-test of difference between 2 dependent means. So that's going to be to make sure, A, that the vitamin D levels did in fact statistically go up, and B, that the VO2 max levels did meaningfully go up. Then we're going to run a correlation analysis between vitamin D levels and VO2 max to see if there is a significant association relationship between those 2 variables increasing. We're expecting that the vitamin D levels will increase by at least 60 to 110%, probably more, but really depending on where they start. Ultimately, we want to see people reach that 32 nanograms per milliliter athletic zone. VO2 max, we expect that to go up at least by 3%, again, drawing from that rower study. So there are some risks and limitations associated with this study. Of course, I think I briefly mentioned VO2 max puts a lot of, that test puts a lot of stress on the heart. So we want to make sure that our research subjects are really healthy. We also are going to be drawing blood, so of course there's always the risk for hematoma or localized infections at the injection site, but we'll make sure that we have qualified medical staff performing these tests and on site should any issues arise. There's also no placebo or control group. This is really because of ethical considerations. We didn't want to intentionally choose to not treat people who had a vitamin D deficiency. So I think that this study still brings a lot of value without that placebo group. Of course, we're relying on compliance by the research subjects, but I do think that this is going to be a highly motivated group and that people are going to be on board with taking the 1 supplement a day. Seems pretty reasonable. And then we also don't want them to drastically change other lifestyle factors. But it's an 8-week study. I don't think that that will happen in that short time. The benefits, we're going to resolve deficiency in runners, and we're going to help them learn how to maintain sufficient vitamin D levels after the study concludes. They're going to get that VO2 max testing, so there's certainly a lot of benefits to the runners themselves. And I think this is really relevant. It expands on a limited amount of previous research on cardiovascular fitness and vitamin D. I think that if we find this association to be true, it's a great way to motivate people to get out there and start taking vitamin D and not only perform better, but also reduce the risk for all those chronic diseases. It's also excellent insight for coaches, sports dietitians, nutritionists, and athletes themselves. So with that, I really thank you for listening to my presentation, and I look forward to further discussion. Thank you. Quickly, here are my references. I would say go ahead and hit pause on any of these if you want to look at them more closely. Thank you.